person that, I don't know, gave me the inner strength that I needed to overcome, or to be able to think about overcoming the tremendous odds that were against me, was my grandmother. She came from Wilmington, North Carolina, to see me at Yardville Prison. I was in that prison. I was put in a maximum security unit, in a cell with 2 guards in front of the cell 24 hours a day, and a cell between 2 gun towers that could train their guns directly on the cell. I was told that I was in the Yardville unit for women, even though I was the only woman, and they tried to keep me there for the rest of my life. My grandmother came to visit me there to tell me a dream. And she came with all of my family, and everybody was happy. And I'm like, what's happening with y'all? And they said, no, she had a dream. And I was like, okay. And so my grandmother's dream was that she was dressing me, that she was in an old house that she lived in when she lived in New York still. And she was putting clothes on me. I said, is that the dream? She said, that's the dream. And I said, well, was I little or big? She said, no, you were big. So I said, oh my God, the only time people dress anybody when they're grown is when they're dead. And so she said, no, I know what you're thinking. No. What this dream means is that you are going to leave this prison. I don't know when, but it's going to be much less time than you've already spent here. And, I didn't understand the dream, to be honest. It didn't make any sense to me. What does this have and wearing clothes have to do with getting out of prison? But my grandmother has always had dreams, and her dreams have always come true.
I don't know how my mother walked her trouble down. I don't know how my father stood his ground. I don't know how my people survived slavery. I do remember, that's why I believe. I don't know why the rivers overflow their banks. I don't know why the snow falls and covers the ground. I don't know why the hurricane sweeps through the land every now and then. Standing in a rainstorm, I believe.
Many people say that injustice and hunger are walking freely all over the universe, and that nature is seeking a response. The moon and the sun once asked the earth, where are the women worms? The earth responded, they've been scattered all over the world, but they can always be identified by the beauty in their colors, which reflects the dignity and the greatness of the rainbow. Nevertheless, continued the earth, they suffer greatly, often much more than what is commonly endured by a human being. Why? Then the moon and the sun responded energetically. We have to look for them. We have to bring them together. Because it is only women warriors who know how to survive in the midst of so much suffering, struggling, struggling, struggling.
I come from a tradition of women maroons, cimarrons, who didn't just try to escape from oppression, but were totally mind, body, spirit committed to resisting and committed to winning. Whether was Nanny in Jamaica, who fought against the enslavers, whether it was Harriet Tubman, who helped to free more than 700 slaves. I think I come from a very strong history, and I simply want to live on this planet and to continue that tradition and to try in my little way to make my ancestors proud. I want to live in a country where freedom means something. Well, when I came to Cuba, I really didn't know what to expect. I had these like crazy images because even though I considered myself a socialist, I considered myself someone who really identified with the Cuban Revolution. I had been raised on a diet of anti-communism. And so I came here and I was like expecting, first of all, everybody to look like Fidel. I thought everybody was going to wear green fatigues and stuff. It was just like a crazy thing. And I thought people would be talking like the revolution. You know what I mean? I just had these crazy stereotypes. And then when I came, it was like, wow, a whole new world. The first thing that hit me was, just how beautiful the nature is here. Whether it's the sea, whether it's the plants. This is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my life. Everything is so lush, so green, so ripe. And, just the climate made me immediately feel at home. I was very much impressed by the healthcare system, by the education system, by the sports teams, by all of the many things that the revolution has been able to accomplish. What has impressed me most has been how people live, just how people relate to each other. I mean, I come from a society that is literally at war with itself. I didn't even know how to react to people when I came here. People would just come off the street and start talking to me, and I would immediately get paranoid. What do they want? It was very difficult for me to realize. Somebody would say, what time is it, or where did you buy that? Because Cubans will come up to you and just talk to you. Whether you were in a store or on a line, and that was something very different. That human contact. I was born in 1947 in New York City. Uh, I lived with my mother and my aunt and my grandparents in a house in Queens, New York, in Jamaica, Queens. Um, and I stayed there until I was about 3 or something. And I went with my grandparents to live in Wilmington, North Carolina. My grandparents decided to go back to Wilmington because Wilmington was their home. And because also they wanted to open up a small business. They had saved all their money hoping to go back to Wilmington, and they did go back, and they opened up a small business on the beach by the sea. They opened the business because at that time, Wilmington was completely segregated. Well, the South was just totally segregated. It was an apartheid. Um, what that meant was that there were black schools. For example, I went to a all-black school, the Gregory School. Uh, there were the Black Library. You know, we grew up with that kind of reality of uh, not voluntarily living like that, not voluntarily accepting apartheid, but understanding that the price of stepping out and or standing up alone could possibly be death. And from slavery, the idea of political prisoners started. We were political prisoners brought here from Africa. We were political prisoners in the uh, in order to keep colonialism fat, in order to keep the plantation owners that profited from our sweat and labors, we were kidnapped and brought here as prisoners, and our status hasn't changed, whether it's on the streets. We're prisoners of the ghettos, in Harlem. We're prisoners in small tenements. We're prisoners of urine smelling hallways. And I mean, I've always been a prisoner. I've never been free in my life. I don't know what freedom means. Sitting in this place on this plantation, you know, you think back to what those slaves had to deal with, and that probably the only beauty that they saw was the human beauty between them and the beauty of the sky and of the trees and of the grass. And I think that probably helped them to survive, to stay alive internally, spiritually. Growing up, you know, by the sea and seeing the beauty of this planet, it was hard not to really have a profound respect for this planet, for nature. My grandmother, she could not stand people throwing paper on the floor. I mean, she could not take that. That was a crime for her, because and then, you know, she would say, look at these grown people, you know, what's wrong with their hands? They can't hold the paper until they find a trash can, you know. I think that how we live in this earth is very much tied to how we think about nature. And so I think that it's important for African people and all people who appreciate living to make sure that our children and our grandchildren have a planet that is livable. And that means to make very serious changes in the order of uh, the priorities and the politics that exist today. Being African is not uh, a a matter of race. It's a matter of a history, of a culture, of a struggle of a people. And the important thing is to be able to remember that, not to be disassociated from that, not to be torn from that, to carry that on into the future and to carry that on in changing the future. One of the most shocking things when I came to Cuba was just how African Cuba is. I mean, I didn't realize that there were this whole huge number of African people on this island. I had no idea because the projection is very different. How you are taught to think about Cuba in the U.S. media. So I was really shocked. And then I began to be exposed to the culture, and the culture is so rich, whether it's in dance, whether it's music. It's so African. There's the rhythm, there's the drums. I began to be aware of just how much they had robbed us in the United States, because the slavery, the kind of slavery that existed here was terrible and equally as terrible in the United States, but people were able to keep their religions, their gods, their heart piece language. They were able to maintain dances, rituals that were directly from Africa. And for the first time in my life, I became acquainted with the Orishas, with Yemaya, Shango, Obatala, and I felt like, wow, I was reclaiming just another piece that we was stolen from.
Yagumagarere, Abaka. Erosi Baba Garere, Yagumagarere, Alakariye. Erosi Baba Garere. Moro coro como temero, modena que momo temaka. Moro coro como temero, modena que momo temaka. Otani mamatara, eroni mamarora. La we de loro teriki loro a peleya. Takate misa okuroba, boba ena yemata que yana yo. Moro coro como temero, modena yemo modena. Moro coro como temero, modena yemo modena. Otani mamatara, Elohim mamarora, Yahweh Elohim seriki loru apeleya, sakaki misa okuroba, ubalena yemata ke yana eriki yana eri omo.
The Black Panther Party came under the guns of the FBI, as did all of the Black liberation movement. It didn't matter what positions you took. It mattered that people related to those positions, that people understood what you were saying, that people supported you. And I think that when J. Edgar Hoover and those who control the United States government understood how many young people looked to the party for leadership, how many young people were inspired by the Black Panther Party, how many young people supported the activities of the Black Panther Party. And it was, people, just ordinary street people, working people, mothers, grandmothers who would come to the office and bring clothes, come to the office and make donations. So the government just perceived us as a threat because they understood that we were serious. They understood we were telling the truth. And they understood also that we were becoming a much more sophisticated opposition. We were not just the piece of pie opposition, but that we wanted a real structural change in the United States. And so we took very clear positions. We opposed the United States government intervention in Vietnam. We opposed the blockade against Cuba and all of the other U.S. policies that were hostile to the Cuban Revolution. We opposed the United States policies of supporting apartheid in South Africa. We opposed all of the U.S. government's imperialist policies against all progressive people's struggles. By the 1960s, the end of the 1960s, the Black liberation movement became the main target of the counterintelligence program. And what they did was to try to neutralize all of our leaders, to prevent young people from coming together and uniting. And so what they did is try to pit organization against organization. They tried to pit leaders in the same organizations against each other. In New York, where I was, what they did was they arrested in, I think it was 1967, 1968. I'm not very clear on the date. I don't remember it at this moment. They arrested on charges of conspiracy 21 of our most effective activists, of our most effective leaders. As a movement, have to concentrate a lot of our energies on trying to liberate our imprisoned comrades. And even though they were given bail, the bail was $100,000 a piece. And only a few of them we were able to bail out. I think that we cannot look at the Black Panther Party in the past. We cannot look at the Black Liberation Movement as something in the past. African people are still not free, and there are still many, many political prisoners in the United States. It is time for us to demand total, immediate amnesty for all political prisoners and prisoners of war. If we do not take ourselves seriously, if we do not take our movement seriously, then we will have to hang our heads in front of our ancestors. Where I was kept in a room, isolated for something like 4 or 5 days. I was beaten, tortured. It was a hellish experience. No one was permitted to see me. My aunt, who is also my lawyer, Evelyn Williams, had to get a court order for her and my mother and my sister to come and see me. I was in prison altogether 6.5 years. I spent more than 2.5 years in solitary confinement. Much of that was in men's prisons. In other words, I was the only woman. Even though they say that there are no political prisoners in the United States, I was kept in solitary confinement, kept in men's prisons because of my political beliefs. So you figure that one out. What it was prison. Prison was hell. It was a new kind of plantation. I feel like a maroon woman. I feel like an escaped slave because what I saw in the United States in those prisons was slavery. It was black people with chains in cells. It was just poor people, just stepped on and smashed. I'll never forget what I saw. I'll never forget what I've lived through. I'll never forget what my people have lived through.
Irabona de kuna kue de piosu Mowilori mowilora Ogamba eche Anamono yepa
We started to, I don't know, to feel tender toward each other. We started to feel an attraction, to feel like human beings again, I guess is the word for it. And the subject of sex came up, and we thought about it, and we talked about it. And it was really heavy. It was a heavy, heavy thing because, I didn't know how to feel. Because so much that was around us was like slavery, it was like very clear they were out to wipe us out. And it was real. It wasn't any fantasy, wasn't any joke. They were out to take our heads. And, I felt like a slave. I'm sure he must have felt just like a slave. And we said, well, how could we even think about bringing a child into this world? But then what other world is there to bring a child in? I mean, the world is a terrible place. And, then I thought about my mother, my grandmother, my great-great-great-grandmothers, and what they must have thought about as slaves, bringing life into this world. And we just decided that we were going to live, we were going to live, we're going to struggle, and we're not going to kill our own hopes. We're not going to kill our own life. We're not going to kill our right to live. And so we just decided to be human beings, to be people. In spite of all the people that were trying to squash us down and all the forces that were trying to dehumanize us, we decided to be human. The day before it was time to escape, I called my grandmother, and I couldn't call her, and say, I'm getting ready to escape. And so she said, I want to tell you something. Are you listening to me? Yes, grandmother. I don't want you to get used to that place. Don't get accustomed to that place. Do you hear me? Yes, grandmother. Are you sure you hear me? Yes, grandmother. I do not want you getting used to that place. Do you hear me? Yes, grandmother. And so when I hung up the phone, it was like a sign. It was like, my grandmother knew. It was like everything was ready to go, and everything went fine. I think that the only way that we're going to realize freedom, justice, equality, decent living for people is if there's a complete change. A complete change. Everything has got to be turned around, and that's a revolution. A complete change. Separation has been very hard on my family. I'm sure in other eras, I don't know, after slavery, people went around looking for their family, looking for the marks that they put on their children. So I'm sure there's a lot about my family's separation and the pain that I don't know, whether it's in the coast of Africa or the coast of some island in the Caribbean or in the United States. Separation is a real part of being African in the Americas, being slaves or ex-slaves. In my own case, prison has meant separation, exile has meant separation, and well, I'm gonna be real right now because I can't be any other way. Today, my mother died, and I didn't know if I could do this, but since I didn't have anything else to do, and I figured this was the best homage I could pay to my mother, is to try to carry on her tradition, what she passed down to me, what my grandmother passed down to her, and what their foremothers passed down to them. I hope that I can live up to my mother's example, and I hope I can live up to my ancestors' expectation of me, because I really believe that I have a duty to all those who have come before me, to all those who lie at the bottom of the ocean, to all those who lost their lives, whether it's in the cane fields or the cotton fields or, hanging off some tree, to continue this struggle and to continue to love and to continue to believe and to continue to try to be human, to be giving, to be loving.
glorious fight while others celebrate. It is only they who see the dreadful colors of suffering. It is only they who perceive where the intense splendor of victory is to be found. Because warrior women are the eyes of the rainbow, the eyes of the rainbow, the eyes of the rainbow.
My name is Assata Olubala Shakur. Assata means she who struggles. Olubala means for the people, and Shakur means the thankful. It is a name that I took to carry on the name of Zaid Malik Shakur in honor of his family and in honor of the forces of beauty and good on this earth, which I'm very grateful for. That is my name.
I don't know how my mother walked her trouble down. I don't know how my father stood his ground. I don't know how my people survived slavery. I do remember, that's why I believe. I don't know why the rivers overflow their banks. I don't know why the snow falls and covers the ground. I don't know why the hurricane sweeps through the land every now and then. Standing in a rainstorm, I believe. I don't know why the angels woke me up this morning too. I don't
Fugitives from U.S. authorities has been living for the past several years. Assata Shakur, also known as Joanne Chesimard, convicted and sentenced in the 1973 slaying of a New Jersey state trooper. 2 years into that prison sentence, he broke out of prison, eluded a massive police dragnet, and somehow got here to Cuba, where she's been granted political asylum. But even before that terrible shooting incident, Assata was being watched by police because of her deep involvement in the radical fringe of the civil rights era of the 1960s. She was a member of the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army. Yet, her beginnings were far from radical. Attended a mostly white public school in Flushing, Queens. Attended a Catholic high school. Went out and got a job. Then enrolled in a community college to enhance her earning power. Now, up to this point, most anyone would say, so far, so good. Then she became radicalized, and after 2 tumultuous decades, ends up here in Cuba with U.S. authorities itching to get to her. How did this woman move to this from such modest beginnings? In this 90-minute special edition, you'll see our exclusive interview with Ms. Shakur in Cuba, followed by a discussion about Ms. Shakur with persons who were also active in the black struggle of that period, although in different ways. We'll get started in just a moment. During our short stay in Havana. At the site of the old fort overlooking Havana's main harbor that offers a commanding view of Havana's waterfront, and on the campus of the University of Havana. Over a period of several days, she unwound her story that we have edited for continuity. She told us that her given name was Joanne Deborah Byron, and as stated, her early life was pretty much average, right through her late teens, where she graduated from high school and got a job. But then she enrolled in college and underwent a major change here.
I was in Manhattan Community College about maybe 2 weeks before I discovered the Golden Drum Society, which was the black organization on campus. And it was like an awakening. Here were these black people, and they were talking about dashikis in Africa and the richness of Africa. And I was like, huh? You know, I had just come out of this office mentality of, you know, of feeling like a servant and feeling that that was my role to, you know, type the papers. And I mean, and I went back to school basically so I could make more money. That was really why I went back. I didn't go back with any desire to learn or to explore. I went back to survive. And when I got there and I saw that there was another, that life was way beyond the file cabinets and the typewriters, that there was more, and that here were these black people who were into studying, who were into just talking about what was happening, talking about the war, talking about talking about what all of this meant, trying to analyze it with a kind of energy that was good, that was strong, that was rich, and I just got into it. I mean, it just was like sucked me in like a vacuum cleaner. I was there, and it was good. It made me feel alive.
We're talking about the civil rights era of the 1960s now, where the black struggle against injustice was in full swing. The old order of segregation and bias was being subjected to a massive and varied challenge. Dr. King's tactics of passive resistance were viewed as radical at the time. And then black students formed their own faction, which was similar to Dr. King's approach initially, with the special aggressive energy of youth.
We were the troops. We were the people who went to Selma 2 years before Dr. King ever saw that town. We were the people who went into rural Mississippi when the NAACP told us it was too dangerous, that you had to attack Mississippi from the outside, not from the inside. We were the people who, working for $10 a week, went all over the rural South in extremely dangerous circumstances, risking life and limb, going to jail, being beaten, harassed by policemen, not eating right, not having any clothes to wear. And I think in without trying to be too modest, that we were the glue that held all of this movement together. Dr. King was the articulator and the spokesman. The SCLC workers became the instant organizers. Go into a town, spend a couple of weeks, stir up emotion and passion, bring in Dr. King, makes a speech, have a march, out the next day. We were there for the long haul.
There was the NAACP fighting the battle through the courts, the Urban League fighting the fight with corporate America, and a host of other civil rights groups.
The thing that influenced me the most was history, reading and understanding that black people struggle in history from Africa all the way up to the time that I was living in. It was not a process where people were enslaved and went through that whole thing as victims. That our people had a long, rich, strong history, an intellectual history, a history of struggling from taking over slave ships to strikes to building organizations, and that was a history that was not just a matter of George Washington Carver inventing things with peanuts. And I don't mean to push him down because I think he made a great contribution, but I'm saying that was all that I had learned before that. The only figure who had stood out was Harriet Tubman, and it was Harriet Tubman, George Washington Carver, and Booker T. Washington. That was my whole concept, my whole understanding of black history up until that time. And I really thought that Lincoln freed the slaves. I really thought that the Civil War was fought for slavery. And when I started to see the real picture of what happened to us as a people and really started to analyze what American history was all about, I began to look at things in a whole nother way and to see that it was a systemized, that this place called America the U.S. of A. had systematically wiped out Indians, had systematically enslaved black people, and then after slavery was officially abolished, that the oppression didn't end. It just changed form.
Joanne, as she was then known, underwent an awakening that thousands of young Americans, black and white, underwent at the time. As she became more informed, she became a highly charged young person. The next logical step was to become active.
We formed a Third World Coalition, and we ran for, in the student council elections. I was one of the student representatives. That was one part of it. And then I started to be one to just participate in demonstrations, whether anything. If it, we would just get these groups, and if somebody's got a strike on 116th Street, and the whole pile of us would just go and we'd help the people that were on strike, or we'd and we supported all kinds of things, from construction workers who were struggling to break that racist structure.
Fight back.
We did housing stuff. We participated in housing demonstrations and struggles around Morningside Heights. There were welfare strikes. There were not strikes, but welfare movements and rallies, and there was the anti-war movement, which was an important phase in my development, because I began to understand not just what was going on in the States as something that just stayed in the States, but that the kind of homegrown oppression that black people and third world people in the U.S. experienced was being exported, and was exported to Vietnam, was exported to Central America that was exported to Africa, that this was all part and parcel of the same ballgame, the same deal. That it was like a kind of concerted effort to just, maintain a status quo that kept a small group of people in the jet set and a huge number of people in a state of perpetual crash, of perpetual hunger, of perpetual unemployment, of perpetual misery. And I don't say that I got all of that together at that time in one piece, but it started to really change my picture of the world.
The student faction of the movement was now moving beyond desegregating lunch counters and public facilities. They were now challenging this nation's political process. For example, by attempting to include blacks in the Mississippi delegation to the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City in 1964. Young people were challenging U.S. businesses operating in black areas. The challenge was to give jobs to blacks and ancillary business to blacks. Operation Breadbasket had heavy student involvement. Young Jesse Jackson headed up the Chicago chapter and began attracting media attention.
We're militarily occupied by white police. The economic order is controlled by the whites. The chain stores, the private stores. We are colonized people. That's the real violence to us. By the time you see riots, which is considered violence in the street, that is a reaction, that is a consequence to the causes of the deeper violence done upon our persons every day that we exist.
Assata expanded her scope of activities in the civil rights movement beyond her campus affiliations.
And at that time it was easy because there was so much activity going on. I mean, in the black community, there was so much happening, each day. You could plug into something, you could check something out. And what I did at first was to really try to check out different organizations. I checked out Garvey organizations, I checked out so many little community organizations looking for, a way that I could contribute and looking for some way to participate in our struggle on a long-term basis.
Assata went on to tell me that she shopped around for an activist organization to join and selected one of the most radical, as you'll learn in a moment. Some quarters encountered countless incidents of brutal white resistance.
What you're really trying to do is intimidate these people, and by making them stand in the raid, keep them from registering to vote. And this is a kind of violation of the Constitution, the violation of the court order, the violation of decent citizenship. You can turn your back on me, but you cannot turn your back upon the idea of justice. Thank you. You don't have to beat us. Get out of here. You don't have to beat us. Arrest us. Get out. Arrest us if we're wrong. Don't beat us.
Some in the North began saying that it wasn't fair to ask black people not to defend themselves when attacked.
We are faced with a racialistic society, a society in which they are deceitful, deceptive, and the only way we can bring about a change is to talk the kind of language, speak the language that they understand. The racialist never understands a peaceful language. The racialist never understands the nonviolent language. The racialist, he's spoken his language to us for 400 years. We have been the victim of his brutality. We are the ones who face his dogs that tear the flesh from our limbs, only because we want to enforce the Supreme Court decision. We are the ones who have our skulls crushed, not by the Ku Klux Klan, but by policemen, only because we want to enforce what they call the Supreme Court decision. We are the ones upon whom water hoses are turned with pressure so hard that it rips the clothes from our backs. Not men, but the clothes from the backs of women and children. You've seen it yourself. Only because we want to enforce what they call the law. Well, anytime you live in a society supposedly based upon law, and it doesn't enforce its own law because the color of a man's skin happens to be wrong, then I say those people are justified to resort to any means necessary to bring about justice where the government can't give them justice.
The struggle for inclusion of Mississippi blacks in the political process at the Democratic National Convention was rebuffed, and Mississippi police in many instances exacted heavy reprisals against some blacks who had engaged in that struggle.
He said, "You're from rural." And he called me an awful name. And he said, "Get up, fatso, and we gonna make you wish you was dead." And I was led out of that cell into another cell where they had 2 black prisoners. The state highway patrolman gave the first black prisoner a blackjack, and it was loaded with some kind of metal. And he ordered me to lay down on my face. State highway patrolman did. The prisoner asked him, said, "Do you want me to beat this woman with this?" And he told him, say, "You damn right. If you don't beat her, say, you know what we'll do for you." So the first prisoner, started beating. And I was really beaten because he had to do what they told him to do.
From there, when we came back to Mississippi, SNCC had a staff meeting. It had to decide clearly, but the organization was at a juncture. We certainly couldn't follow this because we couldn't come back to the people and tell them try again next 4 years to be seated in the Democratic Party. We certainly couldn't do that. We couldn't do that. So we had to find new approaches. There was only one. Organize the people into their own independent political party. Struggle for the right to vote, get the right to vote, coalesce the political power, use this political power to move to make economic gains for the people, fight against the Democratic Party. That was all. And so while I went alone, I had the support of a lot of our brothers and sisters who took this position and recognized that inside of SNCC, some people were trying to make sure that the project was a failure. So we had to fight inside of SNCC against those who were trying to make it a failure. We had to fight against the Democratic Party, which did everything possible to sabotage it. We had to fight against Wallace. We had to fight against the Ku Klux Klan. We had to fight against all the liberals who were once liberals, but now were telling us, don't get out the Democratic Party. This is the stupidest thing you could do, and who did everything possible, and though they tried, they crushed, they did everything they couldn't stop the people. They organized an independent political party, and they gave it the symbol of the Black Panther.
I joined the Black Panther Party. That was what I decided to do, and I thought that was important.
Well, now, there are those, if they had the opportunity to talk with you, might say, well, my heavens, why wouldn't you pick the NAA or SNCC or CORE or the League, Urban League, or why go for the Black Panther Party? What was it about the Panthers that drew you?
But I think, first of all, because I had already, by the time I joined the Black Panther Party, I had already begun to see that it was not a question of reform. That I basically had come to the conclusion that on every level, the U.S. government was an oppressive system run by and for rich people. And that there was no way that was going to change because the whole system was based on oppression. That was how I felt. So that I was not interested in joining an organization that was interested in reforms, that was struggling for reforms. I wanted to join an organization, number one, that believed that the whole thing had to be changed, because that was what I believed. Number two, the Black Panther Party...
Not reformed, but replaced.
Yeah, that a complete change, which is a revolution, had to occur, that you could not be free under a system based on racism, based on oppression, based on capitalism based on imperialism that nobody in the world can reform a system like that. It's never been done in history, and I don't think it will ever be done in history. So that, to me, that was the most important reason why I joined the Black Panther Party.
Did you find that membership in the Panther Party helped you realize, or was it moving in the direction that you perceived that it was?
Well, actually, I had worked with the Black Panther Party before I joined it, and I had some problems with the style of work. I had problems with the type of rhetoric, with a kind of like macho, with you don't relate to the Black Panther Party style. Well, I mean, it was that kind of thing, and I really like another kind of style. Although I like a respectful, quiet way of relating to our people, of explaining things. And I didn't like that style. And I thought that sometimes it conspired against things that we were doing. And that I felt that that kind of, I guess, arrogant, macho kind of style was not good for day-to-day organizing in the Black community. But at the same time, some events happened that made me really feel that, number one, the party or any party was as strong as the people that are in it, and that I felt that even though I had different problems with different things, that essentially I agreed with the 10-point program and platform.
Better housing, better education, a better dispensation of justice, better medical attention. We wanted black men to be exempted from the draft, military service, and the war in Indochina. We wanted an end to the exploitation of the black community by white capitalists. Later on, we just said capitalists, right? We wanted an end to police brutality and the murder of black people by the police. That was point number 7. It turned out that we really didn't have time for anything but point number 7, because once we implemented that particular point by patrolling the community, and when the cops would come in their cars, and we would get behind them in our cars, and we would be armed, and when they stopped someone, we'd stop and get out of our car, and the law says that you had to stand 10 feet away, and we would stand 10 feet away, and if the cops got our line, then we got our line, and if they started shooting, then we started shooting. Because we didn't feel that there was any more room for playing around with the situation.
The willingness of some Panther Party members to confront the police and engage in other shocking acts, such as walking in on the California State Legislative Session carrying rifles, negated everything else the group was trying to do. The Panthers were kept under police surveillance, and members like Assata Shakur found it increasingly difficult to conduct their other community programs.
Strange things began to happen around me that I couldn't put my hand on. I couldn't touch,
Like?
Well, so many strange things would happen. We would get strange phone calls, strange packages, strange people would come into the office and have nervous breakdowns. I mean, it was one thing after another. There was the leadership was under such pressure because at that time, you have to remember that the FBI had made the Black Panther Party the #1 target of the COINTEL program. We didn't know anything about COINTELPRO per se, but it was obvious that the government was attacking the party in every way possible. It was obvious that it was just something strange. You couldn't, for example, you could not, work became difficult. To go and sell the paper, for example. We would send people out and they would stand on the corner and be selling papers, and 5 minutes later they would be at the police station. Why are you at the police station? For threatening a police officer. How did you threaten a police officer? We didn't do anything. We sold the paper. It was the cops' word against the Panthers' word, and the cops would always win. So it was like in every aspect it became difficult. The breakfast program came under attack for supposedly showing little kids cartoons that were racist, that was said all white people are horrible, or something to that effect. Basically, that was the general idea. Later, we found out that those same cartoons were manufactured by the FBI, were inserted in pamphlet papers and distributed. I mean, that was the kind of thing that went on. But we, at that time, we were up against something. It's like you're up against this wall, but you can't see it. You can't touch it. You know that you're a target of the government's repression, but you don't know to the extent. We didn't realize the extent. I decided that I would leave the party, and I had not spent, I think, maybe a month outside, outside of the party, when it began to be obvious that I was the target of like the most extreme kind of surveillance that one could imagine. I mean, I lived on 138th Street. I'd look down in front of the building, and there would be two white guys reading the paper. One would read the paper for 15 minutes, then the other one would read the paper for 15 minutes. I decided that I would try to concentrate on my studies. I would just try to go on normal life, and then I would move. The reason that I wanted to move, because my whole house was bugged. And how I knew that it was bugged was that I was practicing on a tape recorder something one day, and the phone rang. So I put the tape recorder down, and I go answer the phone, and a voice says, "Stop making tape." It hangs up. And that was the kind of day-to-day thing I was dealing with. So the next thing, I mean, there was a big jump. The next thing I know, I'm walking down the street, and one of my comrades comes up and says, "Don't go home." What do you mean, don't go home? Do not go home. They just raided your house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They just raided my house. Do not go home. I mean, like, I was like paralyzed for some hours. It was real. And then I'm faced with a decision.
Police raided your house.
Mm-hmm. Go home, find out what it's all about, go down to the precinct and say, "I heard you just raided my house, and I want to discuss that." But I wasn't prepared to do that. I wasn't prepared to do that because of what was happening at that time. For example, the entire leadership of the Black Panther Party, 21 people were charged with conspiracy and were arrested and were put in prison. They were charged, and they were the New York Panther 21.
Conspiracy to?
Well, the charges were insane. They were like conspiracy to blow up department stores on Easter, the time when the stores are filled with black people. I mean, the charges were so insane that it got to the point that they were actually charged with blowing up or conspiring to blow up a botanical garden. The Bronx Botanical Gardens. I mean, that was the nature of the charges. And even though after one of the longest trials in New York City history, a jury found them guilty in like an hour or something like that. I mean, found them not guilty, excuse me, in an hour or less. They spent 2 years of their lives in prison. they had a bail of $100,000 each. And at that time, the whole one of the most common tools of repression that the government used was the conspiracy trials. They used a whole lot of other things. It later came out, but at that time, it was obvious that if you breathe wrong, you get charged with conspiracy, or you get charged with inciting a riot, and then they give you another charge of inciting a riot, or I mean, and it happened not just to Bobby Seals, not just to Rap Brown. It happened to so many people.
So all of this was swirling around the raid on your house. So what option did you take? You said you had a couple of options. Mm-hmm. What did you decide to do?
I decided to make myself unavailable. I decided to disappear. They said that they were looking for me for the charge of harboring a fugitive. And that was what I thought was the charge outstanding against. And I never got charged with that, in fact, officially.
Why did you make yourself scarce? Because you thought that they were going to arrest you?
They wanted to, yes, I thought they were going to arrest me. And not only was I afraid that they were going to arrest me, I was afraid of what else, much more afraid of what else they would do.
Be specific. What do you mean?
Well, I was afraid that they would torture me, beat me. For example, Joan Bird, who's my co-worker in the medical cadre, had been beaten brutally. She was one of the Panther 21, hung outside of a window. If you see any of the pictures of her at that time, I mean, she was unrecognizable. The woman had been beaten beyond belief. And there was no guarantee that they would not do the same thing to me. And given the way that they were following me, all the things that were happening to me, I assumed that that was definitely, if not a possibility, a probability.
Mm-hmm. So you hid out. When was this?
This was in 71. I believe that this happened in about the end of 70, 71.
You changed your appearance?
Somewhat, yeah.
Mm-hmm. You left town or you stayed in town? Okay, no comment.
No comment.
Right. How long did this continue?
Well, this continued for about 2 years. And
was a warrant issued for your arrest?
Well, let me tell you, what started to happen was that the government became more and more and more desperate in terms of their search for me. I think that they were under the impression that I had this wealth of information that they could beat out of me or torture out of me. What they did was they started a campaign to try me in the newspapers. And they set up a scenario which gave me very little possibility of remaining alive for much time. What they did, they began to charge me with everything and anything that any woman in the New York area was involved in. They began to charge me for things that only men had been involved in. And if they could not, if there was no stretch of the imagination that they could say I had been involved, what they would do is say, well, she planned it. Let me just clarify something. There were some charges. There was one charge that was out against me I was accused of, in 1971, there was a charge of attempted robbery that was out against me. That was one that I was formally charged with that. It was later dismissed, but there was a charge against me. I don't want to give a false impression. But all of those charges that were the front pages of the Daily News, all of those day-to-day scandal sheet charges, I was never charged with officially. Just imagine you. Tomorrow someone says, you're wanted for murder. What do you do? How do you deal with that? Either you turn yourself in and subject yourself to whatever may happen to you, or you run the risk of any cop, anywhere, coming and just blowing you away. Because once an accusation is made, then your life is worth 2 cents. I mean, and in my case, they set up a series of events that pushed me into the reality of that I knew that I had to leave the country. I had to do something because, they were setting up the circumstances to just blow me away.
While she was underground, Assata Shakur became involved in the fateful incident on the New Jersey Turnpike, resulting in the killing of New Jersey State Trooper Werner Foster. Assata Shakur left New York with 2 men, Messrs. Clark Squire, who would be wounded in the shootout, and Zaid Shakur, also known as James Costin, who would be killed in that shootout. They all headed south on the New Jersey Turnpike.
We stopped to eat. We at a Howard Johnson's restaurant. We ate. We got back into the car, and shortly after, we were stopped by the police, by the New Jersey State Police.
There must have been some dialogue between the 3 of you in the car, because you were, for lack of a better word, on the lam.
Yeah. Between the 3 of us? Well, yeah.
So you must have said something,
Well, actually, we were stopped, but we did not think that there was, we thought it was maybe some little thing, and that Sundiata was going to go back and show him some ID, and that it was a question of maybe we didn't really know. So Sundiata decided to go out and present the ID so that, we can go on peacefully. And that was basically what was in our heads, although there were all the other considerations that registered in the back, but I don't think that we really were alerted that, this is a situation where they're going to start shooting in the car. I was not thinking that, really. I said, well, this is, I was nervous. I was like, okay, but I didn't think that it was going to be all that.
Can you tell me what he said to you as best you can recall?
I can't.
Was it something, did he call you by name? Did he talk about, you weren't driving?
No. The driver had gotten out of the car. He came to the car and started to question me, and where we were going, what, that kind of stuff. And then he said, put your hands, in front of you where I can see them. And
which would have been the dashboard, I guess, inside the car.
No, I was facing him. He had a gun in my face, and I put my hands out like this. And in a matter of seconds, I was shot. It was like a nightmare. It was like, it's like in a dream. And it didn't seem real, but it happened.
There are many, however, who disagree with Ms. Shakur's account. Among them, the jury who heard the case against her and found her and Charles Squire, her surviving companion in the car, guilty of murder. The superintendent of New Jersey State Police also differs with Ms. Shakur. He agreed to be interviewed, where the prosecutor of the case, the presiding judge, the FBI, and the U.S. State Department did not.
Our troopers were on patrol, Verna Forster and Jim Harper. They saw an automobile, and I may be wrong on some of my details because it's been some time.
Yeah.
But the inspection sticker on that automobile did not match the license plate. They saw the sticker, they recognized it. They knew that the origin of the car was not the same as the origin of the license plate. They stopped the car. As they were questioning them, there were three people in the car, Joanne Chesimard, Clark Squire, and James Costin. A gun battle ensued. We charged Joanne with shooting and causing the death, being part of the group that caused the death of Trooper Verna Forster, who was murdered at the scene. James Costin was killed at the scene. Clark Squire escaped. We caught him locally about 3.5 days later. Joanne Chesimard was shot in the car. Trooper Harper was wounded. There was a violent exchange.
I was shot once under my arm and once from the back.
The bullet under your arm, where did the bullet come out?
It didn't. The bullet is still there.
It's still in you.
Mm-hmm. It went through here. It broke this bone, and it's still in my chest. I was, this hand was paralyzed.
Harper stopped the car. Forster came up behind. But Verna was completely removed from this kind of mix that would give rise to the argument that this was a racial confrontation. It wasn't a racial confrontation. Joanne Chesimard was one of the most sought-after fugitives in this nation. Every policeman in New York or Los Angeles was, in one way or another, looking for Joanne Chesimard. And now I'm convinced they were doing their job and doing their job properly.
The first week was the most difficult week. I mean, if you can imagine what, what they did when they found out who I was. They wanted information. They thought I had it. And they did everything that they could to get it out of me, they didn't just beat me any old kind of way. I mean, they had a constraint. That was probably what saved my life. And it was what was taking place was in a hospital. They took me to a suite of a hospital. It was the Johnson & Johnson suite. Is where executives go. And in order to get into the hospital room, you had to go into a living room, which was attached next door, so they controlled who came in, who didn't. And I was accused of killing a state trooper, and state troopers for 2 weeks guarded me, quote unquote. And you can imagine. They did everything they could. Every day was going to be my last day on earth. When they get next to the bed, and they cuffed me to the bed, and the cuffs were sticking in my legs until they started to swell. Where does it hurt? Does it hurt here? Does it hurt here? That was part of what happened.
Jill, let me tell you something. I've been working with offenders for 35 years, and I can't think of an offender who would have been better guarded, or an offender against whom we would have guarded against any kind of improper activity than Joanne Chesimard. I think that it would have been foolhardy for anyone to have done things like that. I'm certain that the troopers who guarded her were not in love with her, but I'm also certain that those troopers were clear in their minds that if they didn't watch what they were doing, someone was going to take her away from them. And I've listened to all the reasoning. I've listened to all the accusations. I don't believe them, to be very candid.
I opened my eyes and I was trying to adjust to the light, and I kept looking at something that was next to me, and I realized what it was. I was looking at a plastic bag, and that inside that plastic bag was they. And then I heard a voice say, if you don't tell us what we want to know, this is what's going to happen to you.
Assata Shakur was tried and convicted of murder by an all-white jury. she was issued a mandatory life sentence. Clark Squire, who was also in the car with Ms. Shakur, had been similarly convicted and sentenced in an earlier trial.
I was convicted of killing a New Jersey state trooper, which is a state offense. They transferred me under an agreement called the Interstate Compact Agreement, which says they can take any prisoner in the U.S. and transfer them anywhere they want to. So they transferred me to a prison in Alderson, West Virginia, which is the federal prison for women, to a prison within a prison, the maximum security unit or something I was called. In that prison, I found that it was the exact opposite of all the experiences that I had seen in prison. In my whole time in prison, most of the women are black or Puerto Rican. The only black woman in the maximum security prison at Alderson, West Virginia. In a prison with the Aryan Sisterhood, about 11 or 12 members, people who wore swastikas on their jeans, who took pictures in giving the Hitler salute. I was in prison with them and with the Manson family. Women, they call themselves Red and Blue. One was Squeaky Frome, and the other one was Sandra Good. And the Aryan Sisterhood, a few hillbillies, the Manson family, and one other woman who, Rita Brown, who was not she was a revolutionary woman, but white. That was where I was put.
Who threatened you against you?
Oh, of course.
She wasn't being set up. She was setting up. She wanted to come back to a Jersey jail that she could get out of. That's what she wanted to do. And she did it very skillfully.
Is it true, what she claims, that she was incarcerated with the woman who shot Gerald Ford, the Manson women, and some female white Nazis or something?
I'm not sure about the others, but she certainly was incarcerated with, was it Streaky Frome? Some name such as that, who tried to assassinate President Ford. But it doesn't make any difference, does it? She was incarcerated with all kinds of murderers when she once got to Clinton farms here in New Jersey.
Fortunately, this unit was closed down. Not because of any kindness on the part of the Federal Bureau, but these women were all white women. So that their considerations were taken into account, and they decided that that unit would be closed. I was then sent, first I was put in the hole for a while until they figured out what they were going to do with me, and after that they sent me to New Jersey, to Clinton Prison for Women. They sent me to the maximum security section of Clinton. But what they did was they told all the women, nobody from now on will be able to work in population, in the prison population. So all the women who were had jobs or went to school with the other prison population now had no jobs, no schools, no programs, and were just locked down in that little area. And of course, you know, the cause of it, what was the cause? Her. They moved women out of that area who they thought might be somewhat sympathetic and flooded the area with women who were notorious rats for the prison administration. So I'm looking at all this, and I said, well, I think that they're going to try to kill me, you know. And the prison was constantly instigating things, you know. Well, if it wasn't for her, you know. I decided
you decided
Yeah, it was time
it was time to.
to escape, to try to escape, and that's what I did.
When she was sent to Clinton, we knew that at some point in time she'd be rescued, and she was.
It happened on November 2nd, 1979. Miss Shakur broke out of the maximum security facility for women in Clinton, New Jersey.
And I say it wasn't an escape, it was a rescue, because people came in from the outside, assaulted that facility, and took her out. They took her from there to East Orange. We know that from East Orange, she eventually found her way to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and/or went out of the country and came back to Pittsburgh. I'm not quite sure. But if you are to listen to the testimony of James Costin, who was a witness, a cooperating witness in the Nyack trial, he put her on an airplane in an airport, probably JFK, and she was bound somewhere for the Mediterranean.
I escaped. It was a clean escape. No one was hurt. I planned it as well as I could plan it, and that's all I got to say about it.
How did you end up here? What can you tell us about that?
Well, I wanted to find somewhere where I would have a chance to be with my daughter, where I would have a chance to normalize my life, where I would have a chance to grow, to work, to contribute in some way to what's happening in this planet, and to try to keep up, to keep struggling on some level, and to keep active. So I decided that I would come to Cuba. I came and I said, well, here I am. Now y'all got to make a decision and what y'all gonna do, because that was, I mean, there was no way, you can't call them, hi, can I come down? That was impossible.
My reaction is just the same as the reaction I'd have on any other criminal type that's found refuge in a safe haven nation, a communist nation. I think we've got to pursue that individual. We've got to exhaust every avenue possible to get her back here. She has been tried under our system of murdering a member of the New Jersey State Police who was in the performance of his duties. And she deserves to be incarcerated and to pay the penalty.
You ever think you'll come back to the States?
I think that would be difficult at this time.
Ms. Shakur attends the university in Havana and says that she will continue her activism. She's written a book that was recently published in the U.S., much to the consternation of some.
I think that it's offensive that a fugitive of this type, who really pledged, whether she meant it or not, or could have accomplished it or not, to overthrow the government in the United States by violent means. I think it's offensive to see that she's accessing the capitalist system that she has downtrodden, writing a book to profit from sales or something like this. So, yeah, I'm offended by it. I think that, if anything, the people of this nation ought to take that book and leave it right on the bookshelf.
Further, Colonel Pagano has written Fidel Castro requesting Ms. Shakur's extradition. While Assata Shakur pursues her life in Cuba, some in the U.S. are outraged about a number of points involving her case. Namely, her political posture, her role in the shootout in the New Jersey Turnpike that cost the state trooper his life, her escape from prison and clean getaway, and currently residing in political asylum in a nation greatly disliked by the Reagan administration. Regrettably, neither the U.S. State Department nor the FBI would grant, like it is, any interviews. On the other side of the coin, many of both races in the United States rejoice at her having escaped to Cuba, feeling that she was set upon by U.S. authorities for her political views.
Those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. We begin today's show looking at the case of Assata Shakur, a legendary figure within the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army. On Thursday, she became the first woman ever to make the FBI's most wanted terrorist list. In addition, the FBI in the state of New Jersey doubled the reward for her capture to $2 million. Shakur was convicted in the May 2nd, 1973 killing of a New Jersey state trooper during a shootout that left one of her fellow activists dead. She was shot twice by police during the incident. In 1979, she managed to escape from jail, and she later fled to Cuba, where she received political asylum. She has long proclaimed her innocence. On Thursday, FBI Special Agent Aaron Ford spoke at a press conference announcing Shakur's placement on the most wanted terrorist list. He refers to Shakur as Joanne Chesimard, her original name.
Openly and freely in Cuba, she continues to maintain and promote her terrorist ideology. She provides anti-U.S. government speeches espousing the Black Liberation Army message of revolution and terrorism. No person, no matter what his or her political or moral convictions are, is above the law. Joanne Chesimard is a domestic terrorist who murdered a law enforcement officer execution style.
That's FBI Special Agent Aaron Ford. In a moment, we'll be joined by two guests, the scholar and activist Angela Davis, who faced her own murder trial decades ago, and Lennox Hines, Assata Shakur's longtime attorney for some 40 years. But first, we turn to Assata Shakur in her own words. In 1998, Democracy Now! Aired her reading an open letter to Pope John Paul II during his trip to Cuba. She wrote the message after New Jersey state troopers sent the Pope a letter asking him to call for her extradition.
My name is Assata Shakur, and I was born and raised in the United States. I am a descendant of Africans who were kidnapped and brought to the Americas as slaves. I spent my early childhood in the racist, segregated South. I later moved to the northern part of the country, where I realized that Black people were equally victimized by racism and oppression. I grew up and became a political activist, participating in student struggles, the anti-war movement, and most of all, in the movement for the liberation of African Americans in the United States. I later joined the Black Panther Party, an organization that was targeted by the COINTELPRO program, a program that was set up by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to eliminate all political opposition to the U.S. government's policies, to destroy the Black liberation movement in the United States, to discredit activists, and to eliminate potential leaders. Under the COINTELPRO program, many political activists were harassed, imprisoned, murdered, or otherwise neutralized. As a result of being targeted by COINTELPRO, I, like many other young people, was faced with the threat of prison, underground, exile, or death. The FBI, with the help of local police agencies, systematically fed false accusations and fake news articles to the press, accusing me and other activists of crimes we did not commit. Although in my case, the charges were eventually dropped or I was eventually acquitted, the national and local police agencies created a situation where, based on their false accusations against me, any police officer could shoot me on sight. It was not until the Freedom of Information Act was passed in the mid-'70s that we began to see the scope of the United States government's persecution of political activists. At this point, I think that it is important to make one thing very clear. I have advocated, and I still advocate, revolutionary changes in the structure and in the principles that govern the United States. I advocate self-determination for my people and for all oppressed people inside the United States. I advocate an end to capitalist exploitation, the abolition of racist policies, the eradication of sexism, and the elimination of political repression. If that is a crime, then I am totally guilty. To make a long story short, I was captured in New Jersey in 1973 after being shot with both arms held in the air and then shot again from the back. I was left on the ground to die, and when I did not, I was taken to a local hospital where I was threatened, beaten, and tortured. In 1977, I was convicted in a trial that can only be described as a legal lynching. In 1979, I was able to escape with the aid of some of my fellow comrades. I saw this as a necessary step, not only because I was innocent of the charges against me, but because I knew that the racist legal system in the United States, I would receive no justice. I was also afraid that I would be murdered in prison. I later arrived in Cuba, where I am currently living in exile as a political refugee. The New Jersey State Police and other law enforcement officials say they want to see me brought to justice. But I would like to know what they mean by justice. Is torture justice? I was kept in solitary confinement for more than 2 years, mostly in men's prisons. Is that justice? My lawyers were threatened with imprisonment and imprisoned. Is that justice? I was tried by an all-white jury without even the pretext of impartiality and then sentenced to life in prison plus 33 years. Is that justice? Let me emphasize that justice for me is not the issue I am addressing here. It is justice for my people that is at stake. When my people receive justice, I am sure that I will receive it too.
That is an excerpt of a letter Assata Shakur read, an open letter to Pope John Paul II during his trip to Cuba in 1998. When we come back from break, we'll be joined by Assata Shakur's longtime attorney, Lennox Hines, and the scholar and activist, Angela Davis. Stay with us. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.